Episode 59, 7 Stars Descent. The mushroom world loomed before her, huge, beautiful, brimming with light. The stars twinkled around it, looking down on the world where war and destruction raged. The observatory was coming closer. On the forward platform, Rosalina raised her wand. All things must come to an end. Obviously, there had been many times in Cobal's life where he had been afraid. Standing up to Koopa troop bullies in Toad Town, before he was trained, launching himself out of a tank towards a Neo-Empire battleship, fighting Prince Larry to save Peach. But never in his life had he been more terrified than when Mario and Bowser fought. It simply boggled his mind how people could be that powerful. The entire city shook and the skyscraper threatened to fall down over their heads, even though they were many miles away from where the two legends were actually fighting. The city was lit up with flashes of blue and red light, as the sounds of their blows echoed like thunder. It seemed less of a battle of mortals and more like a battle of gods. Was this Mario's true power? Had the ruler of the Koopa Empire always been this strong? Cobal liked fighting, but for once he was glad he was not the one taking on the enemy. His companions were similarly unnerved.
Crushing crocodiles, are each of those loons carrying some kind of nuclear grenade launcher in each hand?
K. Rool shouted as he laid into some Neo-Empire soldiers, the street shaking as Mario and Bowser's battle continued to rage out of sight.
I never could have imagined the Emperor was capable of fighting on this level.
Strike breathed as he took a pause after felling a charge in Chuck.
Yup, that's my dad, all right.
Roy laughed, transforming his wand into a full-size bonsai bill blaster and headshotting a mech with it. Cobal still hadn't gotten used to the idea of fighting alongside the brutish former Neo-Empire leader. Surprisingly, the aged Drybones Cooperly was laughing, and his skull looked to be smiling, if indeed a skull could smiling.
Takes me back.
He chuckled as he slashed a Paragoomba out of the sky.
This is just like the old days. When Antonio and King Morton fought, the earth shook just like this and the entire sky was filled with their flame.
He spun his sword around in his hand and sliced it across a Neo-Empire Koopa troll's chest, slicing right through the armor.
Oh, fighting in a battle like this makes me feel 40 years younger. Make sure to stay out of the blast radius, kids. That's how I ended up dying, remember?
Cobal remembered very well the stories Cooperly had told back at the barracks of Lava Lake Keep, and how he had lost his life by being just on the edge of one of those massive explosions. Not close enough to be vaporized, but well near enough to win a trip to the underwear. And unlike Cooperly, Cobal didn't have the luxury of the built-in genetic ability to come back as an undead skeleton. As Cobal continued to fight, jumping, punching, licking with his tongue and hurling eggs, the sounds of Mario and Bowser's battle faded away as he focused on his own fights, until, really, he realized the sounds were gone. Was the fight over? If so, who had won? Mario always beat Bowser, didn't he? Except that one time at the Battle of Toad Town, which had started all this mess.
Come on, man, don't think of that.
Cobal chided himself.
Trust in Mario. He's Luigi's brother, and the Big L always said he was the tougher of the two. Super Mario wouldn't go down this easily, not even to the Emperor of all the Koopas.
There was a kind of humming on the air, a rhythmic, mechanized hum that seemed to fill the city. A low wind blew across the street as Cobal saw a dark shadow fall over him. Thinking it was just a low-flying battleship, Cobal glanced upwards and gasped. The ship was enormous. He had thought that the Emperor's flagship had been the biggest ship he had even seen, but this one was easily 4 times the size. From the little he could make out of its shape, it was orange, flying saucer-like and dome-shaped only with a long, thick spike coming down from the bottom. The bottom, dark and covered in blinking lights, Cobal was disturbed to see was absolutely covered in guns. There were low gasps all throughout the street as everyone stopped what they were doing to gape at the enormous ship which blotted out the sky, flying high above the battleships yet still impossible to be seen in full due to its size. Even the Neo-Empire members had stopped fighting. This ship clearly had nothing to do with them. The huge screens that covered the buildings of Kupa Central, each one displaying some sort of Kupa-related logo or propaganda, fizzled. A moment later, they displayed the image of a man who bore an uncanny resemblance to Luigi.
What's this?
Peasley said, gazing up at the screen at the tall, cold-looking man glowered down on them.
Hey, don't pause the fight like that!
Roy complained.
Impossible!
Cooperly gasped, dropping the bone-handled sword he had been using.
No way! He's dead! Greetings, people of the mushroom world!
The man spoke. His voice was deep and majestic sounding, and it seemed to echo through the city.
My name is Antonio. I am here to tell you to rejoice. War and suffering are at an end. The curse of imbalance shall be blotted out. You, children, live in the star's last hour. This is the day of starfall.
A dead silence rang throughout the street. For the first time since the climactic battle had started, all of Kupa Central was silent. There was no sound of bill blasters firing. Even the warships above had grown still. Then the sky erupted into light. Golden lasers fired from the thousands of guns of the huge ship's underbelly, streaking down towards the city, smashing through the warships, and crashing down on the skyscrapers. Debris rained down around Cobal and a laser landed only meters away from him, crashing into a Neo-Empire tank and blowing it to bits. Every bit of order and strategy disintegrated. People were running, toads, Goombas, Piantas and Shy Guys, Koopas of both sides, pushing and shoving each other to try and escape the golden rain of death that fell on the buildings and streets, peppering them with fiery explosions. As Cobal ran next to strike for the shelter of one of the buildings, he saw hundreds of ships leaving the massive mothership from hidden hangar bays, large aircraft with 4 propellers and thinner ships with wings and a turret-covered superstructure which were unfamiliar to him. A new ship designed specifically for attack. The huge guns slung underneath them fired on the battleships, causing them to tilt to the side under the incredible force of the laser blast. The lasers were echoing around the city. Cobal and about a dozen others dashed into a large open room decorated with a fountain which seemed to be the entrance of some kind of hotel. Gold light flashed through the windows as the sounds of explosions crashed on the street. There was a grating, mechanical sound as one of the Neo-Empire mechs fell.
What's happening?
Shroomer panicked, all of a sudden back to his old self.
Where did all these ships come from? This is a most dire change of events.
Peasley mused as he sat on the side of the fountain. The street flashed with fiery light again, echoing his words.
How is Antonio alive?
Cooperly was still saying, pacing back and forth down the marble floor as members of all 3 armies sheltered, tending to their wounded.
He died. Everyone knows he died. He alone could decide this fight, and that's not even counting his new army. Those ships.
A hammer bro wearing the grey uniform of the Neo-Empire mused.
They're familiar. They belong to 7 Stars, a crime syndicate that backed us in the beginning. This can't all be revenge for Ludwig cutting ties with them, can it?
Something heavy crashed down what sounded like only a street away. A falling building? A falling battleship? Either way, going outside now would be akin to walking into a chain chomp's open mouth. One of the golden lasers landed just in front of the hotel entrance, blasting a huge crater into the streets and sending out a shockwave that shattered all the front windows. Cobal was suddenly reminded of his visions of the beautiful human woman in the bright blue dress. Was this connected to her? Luigi leapt from a building as a laser blast shattered the rooftop, bracing himself as he landed on top of the street. Golden lasers were raining down everywhere and he had to run wildly, zigzagging to dodge the blasts that were churning up Koopa Central's streets and filling everything with fire. Everyone was running, enemies and allies, as the battling ships above were hit with a ferocious attack from all sides by hundreds of new vessels that peppered them with laser blasts, ripping through the reinforced wood on the battleships' hulls. Even Bowser's enormous flagship rocked from the damage as the lasers from the colossal mothership ripped through its turrets. 7 Stars and Antonio. They had finally made their move. Luigi had had a slight hope that they could be dealt with later, after peace was restored. But their father was taking no chances. Father? That was a strange thought. Luigi had never known a father. All he had ever known about both his parents was that they had died in the Koopa War. He had been passed around by a couple foster parents when he had been very young, although he didn't remember any of their faces. None of them had wanted kids who were so often the targets of Kamek's kidnapping schemes. He had been raised at the palace, eventually, as sort of a care project for war orphans. Several of the Toads had fond places in his heart, although a majority of the ones who had had the biggest role in raising him had been quite elderly and had passed away even before they had started fighting Bowser. Of course, there in the castle, they had first been introduced to Princess Peach. But now, he was in the same city as his father. His real father. And yet, he was the enemy. How had someone from the same family ended up like this? Shouldn't he have the same spirit as Mario? There was no time to brood on this. He needed to reach cover. Luigi long jumped into a thin alleyway just as another laser blast vaporized the section of road he had been standing on, showering the air with chunks of cement which nearly hit Luigi's head. Mario. He had no idea where he was, but his brother could look after himself. So long as Bowser hadn't hurt him too bad, of course. But Cobal. He had never dealt with anything like this before. And Peach? She was right up in the air, her ship getting hit by all those lasers? And what about Daisy? What if her path had been blocked by a falling skyscraper or something? People had always told Luigi that he worried too much, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing, in situations like these. People were counting on him.
I am coming.
Luigi thought to himself as he dashed out of the alleyway, leaping over an overturned tank as he hurried towards where he knew his friends were. General Flame leaned back on his command seat, watching of the destruction with a smile. Of course, he couldn't really call himself General Flame anymore, since he had left the Koopa Troop and 7 Stars hadn't been quite as appreciative of his talents, but Captain Flame didn't have quite as good of a ring to it. Flame had taken quite a downgrade, from controlling a fleet of ships to having command over only one. It was a 7 Stars gunship, a particular kind of ship which seemed to have been built for this particular purpose, one which was light on armor but heavy on guns. That was the kind of ship he liked. Only losers maxed out their defense. The gunship was around the same size as one of the Koopa Troop's battleships, and its bridge reached from the floor to the ceiling. It was part of the Red Division of 7 Stars, and as such that color dominated everything from the floors and ceiling to the crimson-colored holographic screens the crew worked the ship on. Flame was feeling good. He hadn't felt good for ages. One setback after another had left him feeling rather glum. Admittedly, he had handled the entire Mushroom Kingdom situation horribly. If he hadn't have left, he would have been kicked off high command for sure, if not massively demoted or even kicked out of the army. But Flame had never been a Koopa to brood on past failures. He was a brilliantly shining light who deserved to sparkle. His superior, some pasty-faced Pianta whose name he didn't even remember, had given him a series of dull and unimaginative orders to follow, but people never won glory by playing by the rules.
Take the ship down to the city,
Flame ordered, leaning back and smiling.
But, sir,
a shy guy wearing a red visor over his mask protested, glancing back from his seat before Flame.
Acting Red Star Henrik's orders were. Do you want glory, my friend? Do you want brilliance and fame, money and power? If so, then listen to me, you peon. Perhaps when this battle is over the Grand Star will raise me to the Red Star position, after I've distinguished himself. When you are old and grey, you will be able to tell you grandchildren.
I served on Fortuga's Flame's ship,
and they will look at you as if you were a star spirit come down from the sky. Take the ship down.
He snapped his fingers.
Destroy everything. Why? Yes, sir.
The shy guy replied, turning back and tapping on his holographic control panel. He seemed skeptical, but the workings of great minds were seldom understood by the masses. Larry Koopa viewed the destruction, battleships from 4 fleets duking it out and skyscrapers burning and collapsing under the hail of lasers, with a vaguely amused smile. He enjoyed being up here above the action. Both Ludwig's and Bowser's armies seemed to be really doing poorly. He had made the right choice leaving them. Of course, he wasn't too fond of taking orders, but he had ways of dealing with that. After all, he still had plans to remain on top. Larry's command seat was perfectly seated to his size. 7 stars had members of many different species, so there was an incredibly wide range of chair available. It was rather comfortable, too. Larry's gunship was from the Green Division, and it was a fairly nice craft if it wasn't covered in 7 stars emblems. While Larry had been given the rank of captain in 7 stars due to his skills, he felt no loyalty to the organization, just like he felt no loyalty to his family. Well, almost no loyalty to them. He did rather like his siblings, he just liked profit a little more. Larry Koopa was already concocting his latest scheme. A scheme that would ensure he'd be on top, not his dad, or Ludwig, or the Grand Star. He had no aspirations to the throne, but ruling behind the scenes, out of the public eye, controlling politics and business with his quick wits. Yeah, he'd go for that. Stage 1. Attract the attention of his bosses. Larry grinned and closed his eyes, spinning his finger around and around, blue sparkles trailing from his claw. His crew, hard at work manning the controls, felt their eyes glaze over as they slipped into a trance.
Everyone hypnotized? Good, good. Shoot our friends, K.
Princess Peach gazed through the windows on the bridge of her command ship and clasped her hands together, as the lasers rained down on the city like a meteor shower, striking both her ships and the Koopas. That message, and Antonio. This was his endgame, and she knew it. Peach understood little about 7 stars and how they related to the overall conflict, but from the vision Cammy had given her, this man, Mario's father, had been plotting everything leading up to this moment, manipulating events even as far as her kidnappings. What was his goal? What was Starfall? One thing was certain. Her people were in danger down on the streets. Not only were they in danger from the lasers and the still-present Kupa forces, she could see 7 Stars aircraft landing, no doubt to release troops. It was going to be a massacre, and she would not leave her people to it.
Toadette!
She shouted across the bridge. Toadette, who had been urgently directing a few officers in administering repairs, snapped to attention.
Put out an order to the entire army. I want everyone to withdraw. Back to the ships or away from the enemy's line of fire, it doesn't matter, but I want them all to stick together. We aren't fleeing, but we can't just sit here and allow ourselves to be hit.
Toadette nodded.
The captain's out there, fighting for his life,
she said, tightening her hand into a fist.
I lost him once, and I'm not going to lose him again.
Turning around, she addressed the bridge in a strong voice.
Order everyone back. Assume a defensive position. Don't let these thugs beat us down.
Wendy Kupa was not the kind of woman made for the heat of war. The sounds of explosions irritated her, and fighting was an awful bore, even though she had had to do it countless times in her youth. When the Kupa Trupa secured its dominion over the entire world, Princess Wendy privately swore that she would never fight again, not as commander or combatant. Yet here she was, on the bridge of her father's flagship, dealing with what was quite possibly the ugliest mess of a battle she had ever seen. Wendy understood little of tactics, but she could tell things were going rather poorly for her father's army. Their fleet had already been pulverized by Ludwig's, although she still didn't regret leaving the Neo-Empire considering how unsafe it seemed to be around her brother, but now this new fleet was here, with some gigantic mothership that dwarfed even the Kupa dominance, and by the looks of it they'd already destroyed 5 of their battleships. The sickening lunges of the deck and the echoing rumbles as the blasts struck the hull made her concerned that this ship was soon to follow. It was chaos on the bridge, the officers shouting orders.
Have our Magikupas working double defending those breaches.
Grand General Sheldon exclaimed.
Concentrate all fire on the new enemy's flagship. Take out his guns.
The Kupa dominance shook again.
Turrets 30 to 36 are destroyed, sir.
A Kupa officer shouted up from the control pit. Sheldon shook his head in frustration.
Move the replacement bill blasters up from the lower decks. Come on, move those feet. This is Emperor Bowser's flagship. If it goes down, so does our men's motivation.
Cannon fire seemed to echo his words. Wendy paced back and forth, her high heels clicking on the tiled flooring. She hated fighting.
Grand General!
One of the crew members shouted.
We're getting a message from one of the Neo-Empire ships. Put it on!
Sheldon exclaimed. Wendy could see that the hammer bro was sweating, she didn't envy his job at all. A holographic screen appeared hovering over the bridge, showing the face of a Kupa patrol dressed entirely in pink armor. Wendy recognized the face immediately, and it infuriated her.
General Ned!
She exclaimed, striding up to stand near Sheldon.
How dare you show your ugly face here, after you betrayed me?
Ned Kupat, former member of Kupa High Command and chief of Wendy's personal army, had not come with her when she had decided to leave Ludwig's side. It was impossible to tell what Ned was thinking behind his helmet, but his voice seemed apologetic.
Forgive me, my princess.
Ned replied, keeping a stiff military position.
Leaving Ludwig's side is not easy. My role in the battle had already been decided by the time you left, and I had no opportunity to leave. Besides, I could not abandon my men. Know that I would have resigned in disgrace after Ludwig won the war. My loyalty is to you, not him, and it shamed me.
Wendy sniffed.
You want your princess' forgiveness, then prove it,
she said. Even though Ned Kupat had served as her right-hand man ever since her teenaged kidnapping Peach years, she had never been called a forgiving Kupa.
Since Prince Ludwig had disappeared and King Bu and General Crucial are out of commission, I am, at the moment, de facto commander of all of the Neo-Empire forces. The prince gave us all an order to continue the battle in his absence, but even he could not have predicted this. As such, I am using my authority to override Prince Ludwig's command, at least until this new enemy is defeated. Any more I cannot promise you, but I will tell you one thing. There won't be a throne to fight over, if we let this organization have its way.
Wendy crossed her arms. As had been mentioned before, she was not a forgiving Kupa, nor one with the kind of mind that made a good commander.
Princess, we should take the general up on his offer.
Sheldon urged her.
While the treachery of the Neo-Empire is abominable, Kupit is right. This enemy threatens the Kupa kingdom's very existence, and it will take the cooperation of all Kupa kind to defeat it.
Humph! Wendy snorted.
How do we know my brother didn't just hire these guys as reinforcements, huh? Maybe he wants to get rid of you and the rest of my old army because he wants absolute loyalty.
Ned made as if to say something, when suddenly the door in the back of the bridge opened and Bowser Jr. and Morton strode in. Cammy, who had been previously in the process of laying magic seals to reinforce the bridge from the laser blasts that had been striking it from above, instantly ran to them.
Young Master Jr. You're finally here!
The aged Kupa exclaimed.
You know, I was getting somewhat concerned. The city is no place for anyone now. A bunch of lasers aren't enough to stop me.
Bowser Jr. replied, walking past Cammy to the bridge's center, gazing up at the hologram showing Ned's face. Cammy followed, as fast as her short legs could carry her.
General Ned of the Neo-Empire has offered a proposal, Prince Jr. He wants to join forces to overcome the Seven Stars Army. You ought to accept. I know more about our enemies than anyone in this room, you know. They are no laughing matter. Especially since we know the Grand Star himself is in command.
Bowser Jr. nodded. Wendy wondered what was the Grand Star's deal. Why did he look so much like the Mario brothers, and what had he been going on about? She hadn't understood a thing that had come out of his mouth.
General Ned, I accept your proposal.
Bowser Jr. said, as holograms showing Iggy and Lemmy appeared, hanging in the air beside Ned's.
Hey, Junior!
Lemmy shouted, seeming a bit frantic.
We're in real trouble here. My ship's barely staying afloat. We're outnumbered and outgunned.
Iggy said, speaking very fast so it was hard to tell what that lanky Kupa was saying.
Beaten down by Ludwig, we don't have the strength to fight these new guys. The Neo-Empire will help us, temporarily at least.
Bowser Jr. replied.
Perhaps even the mushroom forces can be persuaded. They helped us often in the past, remember? But that was ages ago.
Iggy protested, his hologram fizzling a bit, likely from a heavy blast striking the Koopaling's warship.
There's major bad blood between the sides now. Even our families fighting each other. Can we really? Ma? Princess Peach will help us.
Bowser Jr. replied, intensity shining in his red eyes.
If she's still the same person my dad fell in love with, she will help.
Antonio leaned back on his command seat, eyes closed, letting the sounds of battle wash over him. His officers filled the room with reports of the battle occurring below him, which was going well as he had known it would.
Our troops have landed now. Beginning subjugation of the enemy forces. 3 more Koopa ships down, and 2 mushroom. One of our gunships has fallen, but the rest of the fleet has endured minimal damage.
It brought him back to his younger days, of commanding the Mushroom Army against the forces of his best friend, in the many-year-long conflict that people in his old kingdom called the Koopa War. This was a different experience. There was too much of a power gap between the two armies. His enemies, the polluters of the world, would be destroyed. This war would be the last of all wars, the last of all conflicts. Very soon, Starfall would begin. When it ended, everyone and everything with the power to alter history would be wiped away. There would be equality and peace. A world of silence. Antonio opened his eyes. The dimly lit bridge was bathed in the light of the holographic screens.
The battle is going well, Antonio,
Giovanni said, glancing down towards him.
As of yet, none of our enemies have been able to make dent in our forces. There is no way they'll be able to stop the Starfall.
Huh? Antonio said, smiling slowly.
Even if they destroyed our command ship, there is still no way they could prevent the inevitable. To do that, they would have to defeat me. And her.
Giovanni smiled and crossed his arms.
We've won,
he said.
You're right, Antonio. Even if there was an enemy with power equivalent to the old King Morton who could defeat you, no mortal man or woman could defeat that goddess. Not even all the star spirits together, or the Shadow Queen at the height of her power. Indeed,
Antonio said.
Giovanni, Skulls, it has been a pleasure. Tomorrow the sun will rise on our world of silence.
Skulls smirked.
To be entirely honest, the outcome doesn't matter to me at all,
he said.
This battle is what I've been looking forward to. I imagine I will leave after Starfall. Perhaps I will head to another universe, one worthy of my strength. There are ways to travel between realities, you know, like the world the void originated from.
Antonio nodded. He remembered the void that had appeared in the sky from many decades back. What Skulls did not bother him. 7 stars would be irrelevant in the new world. What was he, himself, going to do? Perhaps he'd live a quiet life, maybe take up carpentry again. He'd retain his power, of course, but it would defeat the purpose of his plan to use it to lord over the world. Of course, if by some miracle someone of strength had survived Starfall, they'd have to be eliminated. There would be no more heroes in his world. Just simplicity and equality.
We have a report, sirs.
A toad wearing the orange uniform of his personal division reported from his seat in front of one of the control consoles, on the ring directly underneath him in the circular-shaped, stepped bridge.
There's a rogue. A gunship in the Green Stars division has begun firing on our 1 ships. Larry,
Antonio said softly. He had predicted the Koopa Prince would try something like this, although he had thought it better to keep him close. Better keep an enemy like him somewhere where you could predict his movements, instead of as a wild card.
Shoot him down. Antonio,
Giovanni said, glancing at his older brother.
Don't underestimate Larry Koopa's power. He's intelligent, and even we don't fully grasp all his magical knowledge. If we shoot him down, he'll certainly survive. What do you propose?
Antonio asked. Giovanni flexed his mechanical hand.
Let me deal with him,
he replied, crushing the hand into a fist.
An upstart Koopa Prince will be no match for someone who fought in the Koopa War.
Antonio nodded, before rising.
Eliminate him, Giovanni. Ensure he does not survive.
He smiled. Everything was going according to plan. The war was over. Luigi dashed across the street, running in a zigzag to avoid the laser blasts raining down from the massive ship that blotted out the entire sky. Pieces of debris cut at his skin, but Luigi did not care. He was a man on a mission. A crowd of troops were running at him, dressed in purple uniforms with visors. They were accompanied by strange hover tanks, which immediately fired violet laser beams towards him as soon as they came in sight. Luigi front flipped over the blast, at the same time concentrating electricity into his fist. As Luigi's feet touched ground, he slammed his fists into the cement, releasing the built-up energy with a boom of blue light that sent the 7 Stars troops flying. A hammer bro, looking more futuristic than the ones Luigi was used to in his purple uniform, ran at him with hammer raised, only for Luigi to sweep his leg into the Koopa's chest and send him flying. Luigi fought, fists and legs flying, discharging bolts of lightning at all the enemies who came near as he made his way down the road. People had never spoken of Luigi as an impossible force of nature before, but to the 7 Stars troops, that was just what he was, laying lightning bolts left and right that knocked down dozens with one blow. As Luigi fought, a loud broadcast ran over the city.
"This is General Ned Cuffett of the Neo Empire. As per my authority as the highest active officer, we are to declare a temporary truce with the Emperor's forces. In addition, assuming they will not engage us, we are to work with the Mushroom forces until our enemy, the organization
7 Stars,
has been driven away from the capital. I expect full cooperation. Thank you." "Well, at least we aren't going to have to worry about fighting 3 armies at once,"
Luigi mused as his lightning-charged fist cracked a charge in Chuck's more futuristic-looking 7 Stars helmet. Luigi leapt up into the air to avoid a paratroopers dive bomb, leaping over the remaining 7 Stars troops and darting down a side street. If he tried to take down every enemy by himself, there was no way he could help Cobalt and the others. A Neo Empire mech stomped down the street only a few meters away from Luigi, flattening a street sight as it sent its blinding blue laser towards a yellow-colored 7 Stars landing craft, slicing through 2 of the ship's huge engines and making them go up in flames. When Luigi emerged another wider street, he saw, with relief, the people he had been looking for. Cobalt was there, along with King K. Rool, Peasley, and that fire bro who seemed to hang around with them. Oddly enough, Roy was there too, was somewhat uncomfortable as the last time Luigi had seen Roy, they had been fighting. In fact, Luigi had sort of assumed the burly Koopa had died, with Neon City been completely obliterated and all. But nope, here he was, helping Cobalt and the rest of them against a surge of blue-uniformed 7 Stars soldiers, summoning bullet bills out of portals and making them crash down on the enemy. There was a mix of Mushroom soldiers and Koopa soldiers from both armies, working together to push back 7 Stars. Luigi ran forward, leaping into the air as he summoned his hammer made of pure electricity.
"Luigi time!"
he shouted as he brought it down on a 7 Stars tank, shattering it and sending out tendrils of lighting that hit other unlucky 7 Stars troops.
"Yeah! Big L!"
Cobalt exclaimed, while chucking an egg at an enemy.
"The superstar has arrived!"
Peasley announced dramatically, sweeping his rapier and knocking a trio of 7 Stars Koopas flat on their shells.
"You!"
Roy roared, pointing his left claw at him while twirling his wand in his right to charge up a magic blast.
"I still haven't forgiven you, Green Statch. After we mop up these losers, it's rematch time." "Yeah? Let's talk about that later,"
Luigi replied a little uncomfortably, punching an enemy Koopa in the face. As Luigi fought, a familiar voice boomed through the city, resounding from a powerful microphone on board one of the Mushroom Kingdom's airships.
"Hey there, loyal soldiers, this is Toadette. I'm here to relay an order from the princess. Everyone has to fall back to where it's safe. Get back to the ships, if possible. Remember, We don't have enough one-ups to bring you all back.
Luigi punched a 7-stars toad hard in the chest, sending the enemy flying, as he watched K. Rool demolish a trio of Paragoombas with his blunderbuss.
Come on, everyone!
He shouted, leading the charge of Mushroom, Koopa Troop, and even Neo-Empire forces.
Let's reach the princess!
Suddenly, the road before him lit up in flame as it was peppered with lasers, the blue-uniformed 7-stars troops scattering in fear as the blasts shot indiscriminately, blowing up a tank.
Fall back! Fall back, you fools!
Luigi heard Peasley shouting fiercely. Luigi glanced up as he saw a huge red 7-stars ship, long and sleek with wings near the back and absolutely covered in guns, flying so close to the ground its hull was scraping against the sides of the skyscrapers, its guns firing again and again. What was the ship doing? Wasn't it damaging himself? Was its captain insane?
Wahahaha!
Flame laughed as his gunship rained down fire on the hapless enemy.
Fire all guns until they overheat. Leave no one alive.
He could watch the city burn through the huge window on his ship's bridge. His enemies burned because of Fort Uga's flame. He was no longer a governor, or a general, but very soon, he would be so much more. Maybe a king, maybe an emperor, maybe even beyond. The world was his footstool and the stars were in his grasp. He felt his eardrums pulse as his cannons fired again and again. Those fools at high command, the stupid Koopalings with their familial squabbles, Emperor Bowser and the puffed-up manipulators who led 7 stars. All of them would recognize the gem within their midst.
There are 4 kinds of people in the world. Followers. Leaders. Kings. And the ones kings bow to. Guess who I am? Ha, I'm the brightest flame in the world, baby. See? Captain.
A Shy Guy crew member reported, turning away from his control panel near the window and waving his stubby hand to get the Fire Bro's attention.
Our hull is being damaged by hitting the buildings. If we do heroes flee, soldier?
Flame exclaimed, rising to his feet.
Do champions turn their back on the enemy? No. Full speed ahead. Put maximum power towards our forward guns. This is my moment, so don't you ruin it.
The gunship was coming closer now, its red wings scraping against the build's side and shattering the windows. Its guns were pounding down on the road, blowing it up in bursts of flame, and Luigi and his forces ran for cover. Standing on his own, Luigi faced the huge approaching ship, surrounded by smoke, flame, and falling debris, lightning flickering around him. If he focused enough power, he could take out the entire ship alone. He had to focus, though. Focus. The big cannon slung underneath the gunship fired, sending a blinding crimson blast right towards Luigi.
Luigi!
He heard Cobal's voice from off to his right, and suddenly something struck him hard in the side, sending him flying. As Luigi flew through the air, the huge blast passed him by, crashing into a Neo-Empire mech and obliterating it in a ball of fire. Luigi lay on the sidewalk, gazing across the street at Cobal, who was still in a throwing pose.
He must be knocked me out of the way with an egg.
Luigi realized.
And good thing he did. I hadn't built up enough power to block that blast.
The sound of the enemy ship's cannons ripped through the air as laser blasts fired from the turrets, shooting at buildings, roads, people, seemingly everything in sight. Huge chunks of buildings collapsed onto the street as Luigi saw Toads and Koopas alike running for cover and Roy Koopa ducking into his shell for extra protection. If nobody stopped that ship, they were finished. Yoshi was used to war. If one had seen his younger self, one never could have imagined he'd be the kind of man to think that, but for 2 long decades, Yoshi had fought against the Koopa Empire's forces. It had been a long fight, long and cruel. Yoshi was not a good man. No. Yoshi had not been a good man. There was still hope. If the princess still believed in him. If his 2 best friends, Mario and Luigi, still believed he could atone for the horrible crimes that he had committed in the name of peace and freedom, then anybody would have cause to hope. Even among battles, the Battle of Koopa Central was especially grim, it appeared. Yoshi had always known the odds were against them, but the Mario brothers had always had a way of overcoming the odds. He had even done it a fair amount of time himself, facing down the entire Koopa troop with only his loyal friends by his side, back when Mario had only been an infant. It had been a smaller Koopa troop back then, weakened from the Koopa Wars and barely being held together by Kamek's charisma, but still, that was a large force for just he and 7 other Yoshis to challenge. Laser blasts were raining down from the huge ship like meteors, as 7 Stars troops poured in from 2 directions, red uniformed troops from the right and silver ones from the left. Yoshi and his group, with Koopa soldiers now too, as they had united against the common enemy, stood in a circle, fighting defensively at the surge of 7 Stars troop who seemed to want to crush them between them. Yoshi understood little about his enemy. He had been familiar with 7 Stars' existence for years, but the massive syndicate was infamously secretive. He had been present when Cammy had shown everyone the vision of Bowser's wife, although he, honestly, had not cared much about it. This Antonio man seemed to be the organization's leader, someone who had been playing the long game perhaps even as early as the days when he had battled Kamek on his island. Yoshi knew little about him as well, but he had heard stories in the past about a human man by that name, someone who had led the Mushroom Kingdom to victory in the Koopa War but had faded into obscurity due to his secretive nature. If these reports were to be believed, perhaps not even all of them together could stop him. Yoshi fought. He could not see or think of anything else but fighting. The faces of his enemies barely registered in his eyes, and his methods of attack, jumps, kicks, eating enemies and hurling eggs, came to him like movements in a dream. He was hit, struck by hammers, caught in the chest by Koopa shells, headbutted by Goombas. But the pain meant nothing to him. If he died here, it would be worthy punishment for the crimes he had committed as the head of Fire Flower. He was no hero. But perhaps, though his acts in this battle, people would remember him as something other than a villain. Yoshi saw explosions booming to the northwest. There was one of the enemy ships. What was it doing so close to the ground, and it was shooting so many lasers at the street? It must more resemble a lava flow than paved asphalt by now. Those poor people, but in war one must. Yoshi stopped himself. He had been about to say in war, one must make sacrifices, a thought that still rang true for him, but one he had used to justify many things he now regretted. What was the point of defeating the villain if it left you with all your allies dead and the whole world in flames? Yoshi's eyes, well trained in the art of combat, quickly saw a path. This wasn't something an ordinary Toad or Koopa soldier could do. It had to be him.
Hey, you!
Yoshi snapped, glancing at the large woman who seemed to be composed entirely of purple clouds, who was at his left.
Madame Flurry, at your service,
she said, while batting away an enemy Toad with a cloudy fist.
Hold the line,
he commanded.
I'm going to assist our allies a few blocks away.
Flurry nodded, briefly pausing to let out a huge gust of wind that blew several red-coated 7 Stars troops away.
Dear sir, you can't be serious. How do you expect to get all the way there?
Some lasers crashed against the nearby buildings, echoing her words. Yoshi smirked grimly.
Oh, I have a way.
With that, Yoshi leapt through the air. His flutter jump allowed him to move at a longer distance, although he still had to jump off the head of an enemy Goomba to reach the other sidewalk. A Neo Empire mech loomed over him, firing its lasers at a 7 stars dropship. That was Yoshi's target. Yoshi leaped onto the foot, fluttered onto the knee, and vaulted onto the shoulder. The huge helmet of a head loomed over him. Yoshi jumped on top of it, gazing over the city momentarily. The fires and smoke combined with the neon lights cast an otherworldly glow as lasers continued to rain down like an apocalyptic meteor shower. He did a ground pound on the head, denting the armor, and again until he had smashed a hole into the command cabin. The mech pilot, a blue-robed shy guy, looked up in fright.
Hey, I was just following my orders, man.
He protested.
Don't hurt me. Then follow this order and leave.
Yoshi ordered, looming over the hapless masked pilot. The shy guy was happy to oblige, leaping out of the cabin and jumping down to the mech's knee and to the road with surprising agility. With a satisfied nod in his direction, Yoshi slid into the cabin and into the snug leather pilot's seat. Glowing blue holographic screens surrounded him, along with 2 joysticks. Yoshi quickly gazed over the control scheme. He had piloted Koopa war machines before. This was a tad bit more complicated than he was used to, but, well, the Neo Empire had no real reason to change something that had worked before. He figured the method of control quickly. Yoshi gripped the joysticks tight in his green hands and began to move the mech forward, 1 step at a time, his heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Neo Empire troops ran from him as he made his way down the street. The mech shook as one of the enemy tanks hit its side with a laser, but Yoshi reached his left hand up and slashed one of the holographic screens to the left, tapping on it to fire a laser from the wrist-mounted cannon which blew the tank to bits. The red ship loomed before him, firing its relentless blasts at the street, as he grew closer and closer. Yoshi tapped on one of the screens, making a crosshair appear on the window. He zeroed into the engines, and smiled when the crosshair turned red. Continuing to advance, Yoshi swiped upward on one of the shining blue screens to aiming the mech's right arm upwards towards the enemy craft, while tapping on other screens with his other hand issuing in the commands for a full-on blast.
All right. Eat fire.
Yoshi grinned, jabbing his thumb at the fire button on the screen. A blue laser shot from the cannon, lighting up the sky as it streaked towards the red gunship. The laser sliced through the engine and went straight out the other side, as explosions boomed around it. The gunship shook, nearly spilling flame out of his command seat. The control consoles fizzled for a moment.
What nonsense is this?
Flame exclaimed, glancing from the left to the right.
Our main thrusters have been critically damaged.
A toad exclaimed from one of the consoles that were to the side of Flame's seat.
Captain Flame, we're losing air.
Heh! Flame laughed, leaning back on his seat and staring down at the burning street. Ships didn't matter a thing to him. Throughout his long and brilliantly decorated military career, he had commanded several of them. Even for him, he was far from sentimentally attached to the red gunship, which was named something stupid like Bringer of Justice, or the like. Full speed ahead. If we're losing air, so be it. Let's finish off our enemies on the street by slamming straight into them.
But sir,
the shy guy protested,
this. Goodness me, you are an obnoxious subordinate.
Flame sighed.
Nearly as bad as that blue shell fellow I had back when I served the Emperor.
He snapped his fingers, creating a spark of fire.
Come on, you heard me. Full power to the remaining engines.
He pointed his finger at the street.
Ram em.
The ship was coming closer, cutting into the side of the skyscrapers as it tilting to the left, getting nearer and nearer and trailing smoke and flame.
What is that fool doing?
Strike hissed as the ship came closer. Luigi glared at it, building up lightning in his fist. If he could build up enough energy to hit it in time. The ship's guns were still firing, forcing Strike to flee. Luigi leapt out of the path of one of the lasers, saving himself at the cost of losing some of his concentration. The gunship, groaning as its systems failed, drew closer, casting a long shadow over Luigi, Cobal, and the others. Gritting his teeth, Yoshi slammed the joysticks down, making his mech run forward at full speed. It dashed over the streets, crashing the pavement beneath its heavy footsteps. If the enemy was planning to play this crazy, then so would he. The 7 Stars gunship was going to ram the streets. It was, perhaps, 3 times the size of his mech, but Yoshi had experience taking down foes larger than himself. 1, 2, 3 strides. Yoshi's mech soared over the pavement as he brought his arms forward, leaping towards the nose of the red craft. The mech struck it, shoving the ship against the building nearby it and smashing the wall to bits as Yoshi clung on, gripping it with the full force of his mech's power as he fell to the ground, straining against the ship's thrusters as he slammed the much larger machine to the ground.
You're finished,
he said, as the mech's screens fizzled, overwhelmed by its loss of energy. Giovanni whizzed through the air on a small floating platform, crossing his arms as he flew through the chaotic airspace underneath the 7 Stars command ship, where airships of all kind were locked in battle with the 7 Stars fleet, the crimson polluted clouds that surrounded Koopa Central billowing above. Airships were burning, crumble under the constant hail of their fire. But, he noticed with some concern, some were fighting back. He saw one of the gunships, one from the Purple Stars division, go up in flames as it underwent a broadside from one of Iggy Koopa's battleships, while another glance showed a duo of dropships being battered by a Mushroom Kingdom ship. Troublesome, but only a minor inconvenience. Eventually, they would lose to superior firepower and superior numbers. Any other inconvenience he'd take care of. The small platform sped on ahead, towards the green gunship. Prince Larry Koopa. He was a troublesome man who had put them in a troublesome position. Giovanni did not trust him. And he had known that his elder brother had not, either. However, Larry was far too powerful to pass up. Killing him would be a waste. Predictably, he had betrayed them, however. As expected of the one who had once been nicknamed Chiatsei Koopa. Whatever use the Koopaling could have lent the board of director, he had not lived up to it. It was only fair he'd get taken out of the picture. Larry's gunship was firing with all guns blazing, blasting against the hull of a yellow gunship, which was tilting lazily to the side, most of its systems knocked out. That fool! Thinking it was this easy to betray 7 Stars. People had tried, before. None had succeeded. Most of the time it was Skulls who killed them, but understandably Antonio had kept him behind on the ship. It was best to leave it to the member of the board with the highest combat ability, aside from Antonio himself, to ensure that all their plans went off without a hitch.
You silly boy!
Giovanni thought to himself, raising his mechanical hand and pressing a few buttons on it.
You think that just because you faced my nephews in your youth, you're worth something?
A small screen on Giovanni's metal wrist lit up, displaying the image of a fire flower. Giovanni swiped the screen, scanning through a few power-ups, until he finally selected the rock mushroom. He smiled.
The great Super Mario wouldn't have lasted a second in the old Koopa War, you grandson of Morton Koopa. Your arrogance is at an end.
Giovanni leapt from the platform, his fist glowing orange with seismic power. He struck the gunship, smashing a huge crater into the hull and sending shards of green metal flying as the force of the shockwave racked through the ship. The blue star stood up and smiled. He had designed the ship himself. An attack of this force would knock out all of its systems. Larry's gunship was now a floating hulk, only the reserve power on the engines keeping it afloat. A perfect graveyard for Morton Koopa SR's impudent grandson. The force of the blow was nearly enough to knock Larry off his seat, and it actually did to many of his crew members. The green-colored holographic control consoles fizzled and died, leaving the bridge in darkness.
It's the blue star!
One of the Koopa exclaimed in a hushed tone.
He'll put an end to this madness. We're saved!
Larry grinned as he peered at the man who had landed on his ship. The blue star. Huh. He had only ever seen him at a distance before. He really did look an awful lot like Mario, just with a light blue hat and shirt, and maroon overalls. So this guy was one of 7 Stars' head honchos, huh? Well, that means he'd just have to go. Larry intended to win, and really win. He wasn't going to go playing crony to Ludwig, or run crying back to Daddy, or serve the shadowy will of some council of weirdos. Nah, he'd sit back and watch the show, making maximum profits of course. For that 7 Stars had to go. Larry stood up.
Why? You're finished, Captain Larry.
A toad with a green visor shouted out defiantly, crouching beside a seat to the Koopaling's left.
You'll never defeat the blue star. Long live 7 Stars! Hey, don't place your bets yet!
Larry snickered, summoning his wand with a flourish, swiping it through the air. The glass protecting the bridge shattered.
You're about to see some good old-fashioned Larry Koopa action.
Larry leapt away from his command seat and through the empty gap where the window had been. He landed firmly on his feet, a few meters away from his enemy. The two stared each other down for a moment, neither one speaking. The blue star smiled and flexed his mechanical hand.
Did you really believe you could get away with this, Larry Koopa?
He asked.
The board of directors gained the power to decide your fate the second you joined our organization.
He stretched his clenched fist forward and swiped a panel on the wrist, changing to an image of a fire flower.
I will permit you to know the name of your executioner. My name is Giovanni, and I hold the rank of Blue Star. Do you have any last words, son of the noble house of Koopa?
Wow, this guy sure liked to talk a lot. Larry laughed, throwing his wand in the air and catching it.
My fate, huh? You think that funky mechanical hand can decide a thing like that? My, I'm going to have fun with you.
Giovanni said, pointing his fist towards Larry.
You will soon take back those words. Brat.
Giovanni uncurled his fingers, the palm of his mechanical hand opening up to launch a huge blast of fire at Larry. Larry spun his wand in front of him like a propeller, creating a magic barrier that the flames bashed against but could not get by. Giovanni, his face emotionless, swiped to another item on his hand's screen, that of a cape feather. Abruptly, the flames stopped as Giovanni shot towards Larry with lightning speed, putting his fingers together as they glowed and karate-chopping Larry's barrier. The force of the attack broke through the magic as Giovanni's hand sliced at Larry's chest, the force of the blow knocking the Koopaling back. Even as pain shot through his body, Larry never lost focus. As he flew backwards through the air, he casually flicked his wand, sending blue-colored sparkles to several parts of the ship. They were small and subtle-looking. Giovanni probably didn't even notice them. Once he had finished with that, Larry curled into his shell just before his rear hit the gunship's green hull, spinning towards Giovanni at top speeds. The overall-clad man stood there as still as a statue, calmly switching his hands mode to Mega Mushroom. As if this was just an everyday occurrence. Just before Larry's shell struck him, Giovanni lashed out with a powerful uppercut that sent Larry flying high into the air. He felt as if a cannonball breaking the sound barrier had struck him full force. But he managed to leave his shell and scatter more magic sparkles over the gunship's hull. Larry concentrated hard as he felt the magic tug at his body, his vision blurring as he teleporting so that he was facing Giovanni again. So far, this fight had been going perfectly in his favor. Giovanni switched his mechanical hand to Fire Flower and bombardment Larry with a storm of explosive fireballs, some of which he deflected but most of which struck him and detonated, blasting Larry back with explosions that lit up the air. As Larry, covered in soot, but not as burnt as one would expect, considering the fire resistance that ran in his family, struggled to rise, Giovanni switched his hand to Ice Flower and hit him with a beam of cold light, freezing Larry up to his waist. For the first time in the fight, the Blue Star smiled.
"You should have known this was inevitable,"
Giovanni said, taking a few steps forward, swiping at his hand's screen. The power-up selected changed to an item that resembled a fire flower, if a fire flower was made of gold.
"Do you know what this is, Larry Koopa? It's called a gold flower. The usage of this item produces a powerful blast that completely disintegrates its target's body and converts it to the form of currency. Do not fear, Larry Koopa. It is quite painless, although highly effective."
Giovanni raised his hand, the palm opening up. Gold light spilled out? And Larry smiled.
"Hey, don't start talking yet, Mr. Blue Star,"
he chuckled.
"Thought I was down for the count yet? An all-out assault has never been my style."
Larry snapped his fingers. Beams of light shot out from everywhere in the ship. He had scattered his magic sparkles, dozens of blue lasers which struck in every direction, slamming into Giovanni and knocking him around. The Blue Star managed to get to his feet, duck under a laser, and aim his hand to fire off a gold blast, only for a laser to streak by him and slice it off, leaving a bunch of exposed circuits. Larry twirled his wand around and around, charging up a blast.
"You'll never win!"
Giovanni exclaimed, his face tightening with rage.
7 stars! What are you saying?
Larry laughed as he shot his blast.
"You've already lost."
The blast struck Giovanni full force in the chest, blasting him from the gunship. Unable to recover, the Blue Star fell tumbling through the ground, until he was lost from sight. Larry chuckled and gazed back up at the huge command ship, the large spike coming down from the bottom, stretching down towards the city.
1 down, 2 more to go.
He chuckled, spinning his wand once in his hand before catching it. He had a teleportation spell to cast. The lights of battle cast strange glows through the tall, Gothic windows of the Imperial Citadel as Ludwig von Koopa stalked through the empty hallway, lined with tall, imposing statues of his father. Ships were falling from the sky, ships from each other 4 armies, and bullet bills and lasers danced through the sky. Ludwig cast a long shadow across the red carpet as he continued to walk. His victory. This was supposed to be his victory. Ludwig cursed himself for being foolish enough to involve himself with 7 stars. He had needed the resources. His father and his siblings would have been suspicious if he had started amassing weapons through legitimate means, and none of the other criminal organizations had stock that came near the quality of 7 stars. He had underestimated them. He had considered them just another big gang, like the Pianta Syndicate or the Robos, but they seemed to be something more. Perhaps they had really been using him, all this time. Ludwig growled and clenched his fist. The crown prince of the Kupas and supreme leader of the Neo-Empire was not a man to be used. He would repay them back in full, as he took the throne from his father and his little brother. He still had an army and he still had a fleet. What was more, he had the citadel. Likely it was empty, except for a skeleton garrison. Ludwig knew that there was a powerful artifact stored deep within the citadel's vaults. It was called the Sticker Comet, and it had been the center of a disastrous debacle that had involved his father losing his voice, along with other things Ludwig would rather not recall. The Kupa troop had paid the Sticker fairies back in full, ransacking their home world to steal the comet for good and use its wish-granting to further their schemes. After an unfortunate incident involving the Bean Star where 2 contradictory wishes from both artifacts had resulted in a massive explosion and countless deaths on both sides, however, it had been deemed too risky to use and locked away. As far as he had been aware, it had only been used once, a wish that protected the Kupa Empire from other wishes. Ludwig had been quick to take that strategy into account. He had acquired the Sundream Stone, a rather obscure wish-granting artifact he had found on Yoshi's Island, and used it to ensure the Neo-Empire could not be destroyed through the power of wishes. Likely, the Mushroom Rebels and 7 Stars had done something similar. However, if Ludwig made a wish on the Sticker Comet, he could wish for a great many things that could ensure his victory. Perhaps he'd wish for more ships, millions of battleships that operated on their own without the need of a crew and answerable only to his will. Yes. Something like that would ensure that he'd be the one on the throne once all this chaos was over. Chuckling softly to himself, Ludwig strolled down the corridor, bathed in the shadows of the statues built in the likeness of his father and with light flashing in the windows like a thunderstorm. Antonio sat on his command seat with one leg crossed over the other, staring at the holographic view screens that filled his ship's bridge. His enemies were doing better than he had expected. They seemed to be pulling together, despite impossible odds. The Kupa fleet was tightly organized, operating defensively, with the Neo-Empire fleet on the fringes. They seemed to have created some kind of loose alliance. Even the mushroom ships were helping out. Rumbles echoed through the bridge as the command ship was hit by attacks, although the hull had not been breached as of yet. It was ridiculous. The enemy had no chance of victory.
G. Grand Star!
A toad exclaimed, glancing up from his console at one of the lower rings on the bridge's tired structure with a concerned look on his face.
We've got a huge object, approaching from space at high speeds.
Antonio smiled.
Good,
he said, as he rose.
It begins.
He glanced at Skulls, who was watching the battle with what seemed to be amusement.
Skulls, you have the bridge. I must go to meet our ally. I wish you all the best of luck, Grand Star.
Skulls smiled.
I'll see to it that no one interferes. Excellent.
Antonio nodded. He strode away from his command seat, over a thin walkway leading from the top level of the bridge to a door reserved for the commander's entrance. At long last, his ambition was about to be realized. The red gunship lay on its side on the road, its nose filling up the whole road. Smoke poured from its engines as the mech stood on top of it, triumphantly. Cautiously, Luigi walked to the center of the street, staring up at it as the others joined him. To Luigi's surprise, Yoshi climbed out of the head.
You have me to thank for that,
he said stiffly, leaping down to join them.
Heh heh.
K-Rool laughed.
I don't know who you are, tiny green lizard, but that mech piloting was rather epic. Come on,
Luigi said, turning back to the crowd behind him.
We have to go reach the princess ship. Luigi!
Came a loud voice at the top of the ship. Luigi spun around to see a fire bro dressed in a red uniform emerging from a hatch, followed by dozens of 7 Stars troops who assembled behind him.
We meet at last. I am Fortugas Flame, former governor of the Mushroom Kingdom and constant thorn in your side. Now that I see you up close, you're far less impressive looking than I imagined. Ha, liar!
Cobal laughed.
Constant thorn in Luigi's side? Your bad leadership made it easy for him to start this resistance.
Flame's face tightened with rage as he ignited 2 fireballs in his hands.
You'll pay for that, brat!
Flame exclaimed.
Minions! Destroy them all!
He launched the 2 fireballs at Cobal as the 7 Stars troops surged forward, leaping down from the crashed gunship to engage Luigi and his army. Luigi met 2 Koopas and punched both of them hard in the chest, before spinning around and kicking an enemy toad in the head. He saw Cobal stomping a Koopa into his shell and hurling it at more 7 Stars soldiers, Roy clearing a path through them with his spinning shell, Peasley fending off a dive-bombing Paragoomba. Strike ducked underneath one of Flame's fireballs as the former governor laughed. Luigi saw Strike's face harden.
Ex-General Flame,
he said coldly, flaring a fireball in his hand.
You are the symbol of everything wrong with the modern Koopa troop. Everything wrong,
Flame protested.
Look at you, fighting alongside toads. Ridiculous. And please, don't associate me with the Koopa troop anymore. I have evolved past that. I was made for true, shining glory.
He launched a huge fireball at Strike, who coolly slashed it in 2 with a flaming blade.
You don't need to tell me, Fortugas Flame. I have never associated you with the Koopa troop.
He ran at Flame, slashing the sword across his chest, which knocked the other fire bro back and letting it disappear, before igniting 2 fireballs and launching them at the downed Koopa, both of them exploding into balls of light. Shakily, his uniform burnt and his face covered in soot, Flame rose, a nervous look on his face. He put his hands up in protest.
Look, okay, we can talk this out, right?
He said quickly, taking a few steps back.
There is no need for violence. We are all peaceful people here. Perhaps we can come to some sort of agreement. Yes, I can cut you a deal. I am an honest man. Yes.
A boomerang caught him right in the face. Flame's eyes rolled back in his head and he fell down, completely unconscious. The boomerang spun around until it was caught by a boomerang bro, who caught it with a relaxed smile on his face.
Finally!
He sighed.
I've been wanting to do that ever since that idiot made me his lackey.
Luigi finished the last 7 Stars toad with a punch and looked around the street. His people had made short work of Flame's crew.
Yeah!
Cobal shouted.
Victory is ours!
Explosions echoed across the city.
Don't celebrate yet,
Luigi said, glancing towards a side street.
We've got loads and loads of enemies left. Then let me at em.
K-Rool laughed, as Roy chuckled beside him, giving the burly Kremling a fist bump, which caused K-Rool to wince in pain.
Let's go!
Luigi shouted as he led his army down the next street, leaving Flame's burning gunship behind. Abruptly, Luigi saw something come up in front of him. A large green 4-rotored 7 Stars dropship had landed right in their way, and was deploying what looked like over 100 troops from a long ramp. The troops were marching towards them, and he could count at least 5 tanks, with likely more on the way. Luigi sighed. He understood it was war, but really? Couldn't he catch a break? Suddenly, what looked like a wave of fire poured out through one of the side streets, sweeping around the enemies and their tanks and causing the remaining troops to flee. Out of the flaming haze, two shadowy figures stepped out, one large, one small.
Mario!
Luigi shouted. As the flames died away, Luigi saw his brother in full, with Bowser?
Yeah, that's right, it's me!
Bowser roared, as everyone gave him odd looks. This was the first time Luigi had seen Bowser since the Battle of Toad Town, but the Koopa King looked much the same as he always had, except for perhaps a few bits of gray in his red hair.
He's helping us now, bro!
Mario exclaimed. Bowser folded his arms and closed his eyes.
Don't get used to it,
he said, snorting some steam.
It's just until we defeat these stupid fools. Once that's done, we can get back to our epic final battle. Okay,
Luigi said, scratching the back of his head. Mario glanced up at the sky.
Come on, Luigi. Didn't you hear the princess message? Sure thing, bro.
Luigi smiled.
The star shrooms are right around the corner.
Now joined by Mario and Bowser, the group surged towards a park, where Mushroom and Koopa forces alike were working to keep 7 Stars troops away from the park's star shrooms. The enemy was quickly driven away, much to the cheers of the defenders.
Hope you don't mind me tagging along,
Bowser said, rather conversationally for the situation. None of the Toads seemed brave enough to object. As Mario and Luigi ascended the ramp into the star shroom that would take them to Peach's flagship, Mario turned to his brother.
Hey, brother!
He said.
Yeah, Mario?
Luigi asked, looking a little concerned at the look on Mario's face.
I got a feeling the fight against our father is going to be tough. Like Shadow Queen or Count Bleck tough. You ready, Luigi?
Luigi shuddered, but braced himself.
If anybody can overcome an impossible foe, it's us working together,
he said, putting his arm around his shorter brother.
We're both in this, Mario. Our games aren't over yet.
Larry's plan was simply and, admittedly hastily constructed. That didn't mean it was bad, though. Good plans didn't need years of preparation to be good. Larry had seen Antonio only once before, at the massive assembly before the fleet had set off. That had been enough to set a magic signature on him. Larry was really quite clever with his magic. Every spell he knew was designed to give him some sort of unfair advantage. He had nothing in his arsenal that could raise a city to the ground or call meteors down from the sky, but his stealthy techniques could be far more lethal if used correctly. After Antonio was defeated, Larry would take command of the organization and retreat. Whether Bowser beat Ludwig, or Ludwig beat Bowser, or the Mario brothers beat both of them and destroyed the Empire, he'd still come up on top. With infinite resources at his command, he could do anything he wanted. Perhaps he'd even downsize 7 Stars a bit, because he'd have no need to fight in any wars. Certainly he'd change the name and the aesthetic, if people believed 7 Stars had simply collapsed and Larry's organization was something new, that would give him even more invisibility. Being an all-powerful syndicate leader sure sounded great. He wondered why he hadn't have thought of it before. Guess even he had been too hung up on being a prince. The interior of the 7 Stars command ship was cold and dark. This Antonio guy seemed more into practicality than anything else. A pity. If you were going to build a huge ship nearly the size of a city, why wouldn't you make it, like, super classy inside? The corridors of the command ship were built of black metal with walls that sloped outward, and orange lights lining the floor and ceiling. Honestly, it wasn't to Larry's tastes at all. Larry wandered around for a bit through the identical, maze-like corridors, following the tracking beacon he had set. His strategies ran through his mind. With this technique, he could definitely defeat somebody as powerful as Ludwig. Perhaps even his father or Mario. It was the culmination of his studies in fighting dirty. Something that was the exact opposite of big bruisers like most of his family. Really, he was quite proud of himself for coming up with it. Larry could feel Antonio's presence right in front of him. With a confident smirk, he strode through the door. The room was large and circular, and seemed to be the intersection of several different corridors. It was empty and silent except for the faint rumbles of cannon fire. Antonio stood a few meters ahead of him, dressed in his orange trench coat. Larry gave him a mocking salute.
Grand Star! How nice to run into you on this fine day!
Antonio's face betrayed no emotion.
You're supposed to be dead,
he said coldly. Larry laughed.
Yeah, your little brother made that pretty clear. He sure got a nasty surprise when he tried to get me to realize it.
Antonio tightened his hand into a fist.
So you would tempt fate, grandson of Morton Koopa? Excuse me, my name's Larry.
Larry replied, throwing his wand in the air and catching it.
You can call me Chiatsui, if you want.
Antonio began walking forward, with no regard to Larry at all.
You are irrelevant to me,
he said.
You will be punished for your insubordination, but I have no need to deal with you yourself, unless you provoke me directly. Then prepare to get your hands dirty, Mr. Boss.
Larry laughed, swiping his wand through the air as he cast a high-level speed spell on his body. The wand vanished as he summoned two huge curved scimitars.
Anyone in for some sliced Grand Star?
Like a blue streak, Larry sped towards Antonio, slicing his sword at his head. Antonio smoothly ducked under it, as if Larry had been moving at a snail's pace. Laughing, Larry spun his sword around in his hand before stabbing it towards Antonio, who neatly sidestepped it. Larry flung himself toward Antonio, slashing, swinging, and stabbing with his swords so fast that they appeared to be silver blurs, as Antonio moved around him as if in a dance, never attacking but always moving, dodging each of Larry's blows effortlessly despite the Koopaling's great speed. Larry sliced with both of his swords as if they were scissors, but Antonio leaped out of the way before the swords could bisect him. Larry immediately sprang towards him, his sword a huge silver arc, but Antonio casually slid out of the way, the sword missing him at a hair's length. Antonio was good, Larry realized, much better than his brother. He was avoiding his attacks with so little effort, he might as well be asleep. But Antonio had underestimated him, Larry thought smugly as he slashed at Antonio once again, the Grand Star backflipping out of the way to dodge his shining blade. The speed boost, and the twin swords were both only diversions. He had never intended to slice Antonio at all, not from the start. With every swing of his sword, Larry was scattering more magic energy, coating every wall. It was the same strategy he had used against Giovanni, but at a much larger scale. A powerful beam of light would shoot from every corner. Beams of light would come from every square inch, each and every direction. Even Mario would be overwhelmed. As such, his victory would be assured. Larry sliced at Antonio's head, which he easily ducked under, and stabbed his other sword into the ground, aiming for the Grand Star's chest, although Antonio leapt away so fast he might as well had foresight. Grinning, Larry retreated into his shell and spun away from Antonio, getting out to hurl his remaining sword at his enemy. Antonio leapt over it and the sword embedded itself harmlessly in the wall. Both discarded blades dissolved into blue particles.
Now that you have exhausted yourself, please, leave me,
Antonio said, his voice cold.
You aren't powerful enough to stand on the same stage. Yeah, I agree.
Larry grinned smugly.
I'm much more suited to being the director.
He snapped his fingers. The sound of the snap echoed through the circular room. The walls lit up with blue light as hundreds of magic beams like lasers shot towards Antonio from every direction. And Antonio closed his eyes. He moved in a way Larry thought no humanly possible, leaping, twisting, bending underneath the lasers. It was as if they were all going in slow motion, even though they were moving with the speed of a bullet. Antonio seemed to know where every laser was, where every bit of free space was. He ducked underneath a laser and then leapt up into the air to dodge another one coming at his feet, twisting in midair to avoid 3 others, and landing in a handstand to avoid 2 more. He bounced off his hands and twisted through the air, landing with his feet spread apart to dodge another, and then... Larry watched with eyes wide. This level of physical ability. It was like Mario, times 100. How could anybody even manage to achieve this level of skill? The lasers faded away. Antonio strode towards Larry, with not even a single singe on his coat. A blade made of pure fire slid out of his wrist and he pointed it at Larry's face.
You cannot defy fate,
he said coolly. Larry's eyes widened with rage as he summoned his wand.
Then here's your fate,
he shouted, leaping towards Antonio with his wand glowing, as he prepared his most destructive attack. Something bright and shining launched from behind Larry right towards his head. And everything disappeared. Larry fell, gasping, onto the roof of a skyscraper. Ships were fighting up above him, and lasers were still raining down from the command ship's bottom-mounted guns. Something burned painfully on his neck. His last resort seal. A magic rune he had placed on himself for the time his devious schemes finally caught up with him. He hoped it would never be activated. For, after all, it would only activate in a moment that Larry would inevitably die. The seal was one use only, and would teleport him away from the moment of death right before he met it. That meant that, had he not been so well prepared, Antonio would have killed him. Larry sat down and looked over the burning city, with the Imperial Citadel looming over to his left.
Man!
He sighed, still painting from fear and exhaustion.
Can't a Koopa catch a break?
Princess Peach watched as the eclectic group walked into the bridge of her ship. She was surprised to see Bowser with his son Roy. They seemed to be in the middle of an intense discussion.
You're going to be in a world of trouble once I'm done with you, kid.
Bowser growled.
Why would you betray me?
Roy sighed, scratching his head.
Come on, King Dad. Ruling your own kingdom got so boring. A guy like me needs to fight. I'll give you a fight, all right.
Bowser retorted.
Hey, calm down, Pops.
Roy said.
At least we're fighting the same guys now. As long as I'm beating someone up, I'm good.
Bowser abruptly stopped as he noticed Peach. His red eyes widened. Peach. He gulped, but before he could say anything else, Mario ran towards her and Peach felt her husband's arms around her waist. Peach! Mario exclaimed.
Are you all right?
Peach put her hand on Mario's cap.
Yes, Mario.
she said warmly.
Our crew has done a wonderful job protecting this ship from damage. Your brother trained the people of Toad Town well.
Luigi chuckled, looking a bit embarrassed.
Thanks, Princess,
he said.
Hey, Peach,
Bowser said, stomping away from Roy and the others towards her.
How about you give your real husband a hug, too?
Peach saw the blue Yoshi with sunglasses, Cobal, she remembered his name was, looking confused. Luigi shrugged and said,
It had something to do with a guy called Count Bleck and a plot to destroy all worlds. I don't really think anybody considers the marriage valid. Well, except for Bowser, maybe.
Peach sighed. Bowser. Really, he could be so much like a child sometimes. His mad obsession with her had destroyed the Mushroom Kingdom, and almost the entire world.
Bowser,
she said, her eyes hard.
Please. It's been decades. You have to understand. I'm Mario's wife. How could I love somebody who destroyed my kingdom and took over the whole world as a tyrant?
Bowser crossed his arms.
Well, anybody with eyes could see I'm far more handsome than that plumber, to start.
Peach sighed. Bowser was still Bowser, it seemed. Still.
Bowser, if you want to make me happy, really want to make me happy, I want you to help me.
Bowser perked up.
How?
He asked.
Get your children,
Peach replied.
I want a team of our best fighters together, to take out the enemy leaders and end this. Can you do it? Can I?
Bowser grinned.
Lady, I'm not called Emperor for nothing. Peach, what's our plan, exactly?
Luigi asked, coming over.
We take a small ship up to the enemy flagship and take out their leaders, as I said before. Something hard to detect, but full of enough powerful people it might as well be carrying a small army. Mario, Bowser, you and your squad. Maybe we can even get the Koopalings, if Bowser cooperates. I'm on it, Princess.
Bowser roared, stomping over towards the communications consoles and growling, frightening the Toad out of his seat.
I'll get Junior and the brats over here, in record time.
As Bowser puzzled over the console, Peach turned to a chest that was placed near her command seat, guarded by Prince Dreambird. She opened the chest, as Dreambird shot her as a concerned look. Rainbow light spilled out as Peach stared at the blindingly bright spiral-shaped stone within. The Dream Stone. A nearly omnipotent artifact of unlimited magic power. It was warm and heavy when she picked it up.
Take this,
she said, handing it to Mario. Mario's eyes widened.
Peach, that is. Yes,
she said, nodding.
We can't dare to believe that our enemies can be defeated with something as simple as a single wish, but this still might be some help to you. Peach, the Dream Stone is not to be trifled with,
Prince Dreambird cautioned from behind her.
I know,
she said, turning back to the Pylo.
But we need to do everything we can to win.
Antonio stood on the top of his command ship, his coat flapping in the wind. The city was burning below him as the ships battled in the air. Antonio stretched his arms out, gesturing above the city as he gazed out at the destruction he had caused.
Can you see this, Evelina?
He shouted out to the wind.
Can you hear the song I have composed for you? This is the song of vengeance, my beloved. The last song, before the pure, eternal silence.
Light poured through the thick red clouds that covered the city, scattering and dispersing them. For the first time since Bowser's conquest, the stars shone down on Koopa Central. They were brilliant, more brilliant than they had ever shone, like the mushroom world had been surrounded by a magnificent nebula of blue and purple light. And shining high above the city like a ball of light. Antonio knew the Comet Observatory waited. A beam of light washed over him as Antonio closed his eyes, feeling the magical energy lift him off his feet. Starfall was beginning. Yoshi sat on an overturned tank and looked up at the sky. It was difficult to make out what was going on due to the massive enemy ship covering most of the sky, but he could tell something weird was going on with the sky. Everything was glowing in some sort of heavenly, bluish-colored light.
Whoa!
Came a voice from behind him, and he turned around to see Wario and Waluigi running up.
Hey, Wario!
Waluigi said,
I don't know what's going on, but I have a feeling something really, really bad is about to happen. I hate this battle.
Wario grumbled.
We ought to leave with all the loot. According to my catalog.
Yoshi saw Goombella, surrounded by more of Mario's old partners.
We're about to experience a powerful surge of stellar magic. In other words, guys, this doesn't look good.
Yoshi sighed and leaned against one of the tank's big wheels. Death. He'd die a hero, wouldn't he? Better that than die as the destroyer of Neon City.
Stick close together.
Bowser Jr. roared out in command to the crew of the Koopa Dominance.
Don't let them break our formation apart. At my command, all ships begin an attack run of the enemy flagship. Yes, sir.
The crew saluted. Cammy chuckled beside Bowser Jr.
You know, your brattiness, you've grown into quite the leader. Thanks, Cammy.
Bowser Jr. replied, giving Cammy a small smile. The Koopa Dominance was shaking, repeatedly being struck by the enemy's fire, but its powerful defenses were holding.
Prince Bowser Jr.
Paraplunk exclaimed, flapping towards him.
We're receiving a transmission from the Mushroom Kingdom flagship. It's me, kid.
Bowser roared as a hologram showing his face appeared hovering above the bridge.
Yeah, that's right. Me. Dad.
Bowser Jr. exclaimed, running towards the hologram. He hadn't seen his father since the devastating battle with Mario.
You're all right. I was worried about you, Daddykins.
Wendy shouted.
Why? Yeah.
Morton gulped.
I thought Mario might have finally done you in. Mario.
Bowser laughed.
Come on, there's no way he could ever beat me that bad. Him and I have declared a temporary truce, at least until we get rid of these star losers. Junior. Morton. Wendy. And Iggy and Lemmy, too.
The holograms of the other Koopalings appeared, having abruptly been summoned by Bowser.
All of you. Make your way to Peach's ship. Peach.
He turned around to glance at somebody Junior couldn't see.
Could you send them the coordinates? Pretty please.
He turned around and grinned.
Okay, you should find the ship easily now. Step to it. We're going to go beat down the enemy, the classic Koopa family way. Yeah.
Bowser Jr. smiled, clenching his fist as the hologram disappeared.
Time to throw some punches.
Morton roared.
Air. Bowser Jr.,
Cammy said. She sounded troubled.
What, Cammy?
He asked.
There's something I need to tell you about our enemy. Please brace yourself. I won't mince words. It's rather rough.
A few moments later, Bowser Jr. was in his clown car flying through the air beside the clown cars of Morton and Wendy. Bullet bills and lasers were flying through the air, and the Koopa Prince had to concentrate to make sure he wouldn't be shot down by accident. It was difficult to concentrate, with Cammy's revelations still whirling through his head. Antonio, the father of Mario and Luigi and the head of the new attacking army, had killed their mother. Bowser Jr. was full of rage. He barely remembered her face, but his older siblings had told him stories. Ludwig had always spoken fondly of her. He missed the old Ludwig, really, who had always been egotistical but had never had ambitions that overstepped their boundaries. A laser blast narrowly missed Bowser Jr. as he urged his clown car forward. There was still a ways to go before they reached Peach's ship, and anything could happen in that space.
Dad's counting on me,
Bowser Jr. thought to himself.
I can't let him down. Junior,
cried Wendy.
Look out!
A 7-Stars dropship, its large propellers roaring, was coming for them, firing lasers from concealed guns and letting Paragoombas and Paratroopas out of countless hatches. There was a huge swarm of them coming, over 100 by the looks of it. Bowser Jr. spat a fireball towards the first Koopa, knocking him out of the sky. 4 more took its place.
Come on, let's clear a path,
he shouted as the flying enemies, dressed in purple uniforms and visors, mobbed them. Bowser Jr. breathed fireball after fireball, swatting them out of the way with his fists as Wendy and Morton launched magic blasts and glowing candy rings at the enemies. There were too many. Perhaps Bowser could have done it, but he still wasn't as strong as his dad. No. That was the wrong way of thinking of it. He was the same age as Bowser had been, back at the height of his rivalry with Mario. He had to stop thinking of himself as weaker.
Go on ahead,
he roared at his siblings.
I'll catch up.
Turning around without waiting to see if they had listened to him, Junior faced the massive cloud of flying enemies. He sucked in a massive amount of flame, building the fire hotter and hotter within his throat, until it erupted in a humongous flaming roar, blasting the enemies away. Coughing, Bowser Jr. surveyed the now scattered enemy force.
If Dad had seen that fire blast, he would have been proud,
he thought to himself. Then a laser blast struck Bowser Jr.'s clown car. It shook, nearly throwing Jr. from his seat. He heard the sound of his engines failing as the clown car began to fall down, down, down towards the Imperial Citadel.
Sorry, I couldn't follow your instructions, Dad,
he thought to himself as the wind whipped at his face as he continued the long, long fall.